In the far future, there is no peace worth remembering. There is only survival measured in centuries, bought with oceans of blood, and recorded in archives so vast that truth itself becomes diluted by dogma. The Imperium of Man endures not because it is righteous, nor because it is wise, but because it is relentless. 1,000,000 worlds burn so that 1,000,000 more may live another day beneath the shadow of the God Emperor's throne. The galaxy is hostile by its very nature. Stars are weapons, planets are battlegrounds. Life is a resource to be spent, never cherished. In this age, the Imperium has learned one absolute lesson. Anything that does not conform must either be reshaped or destroyed. There can be no exceptions, because exceptions become precedents, and precedents become heresies. And yet, despite 10,000 years of conquest, despite the endless crusades and purges, there remain places the Imperium has forgotten. Not abandoned, not destroyed, forgotten. During the age of strife, when warp storms severed humanity from itself and reason collapsed into superstition, entire systems vanished from imperial record. Some fell to Xenos, some to daemons. Others simply endured in silence, evolving along paths never sanctioned by Terra. When the Great Crusade ended and the Imperium hardened into its present form, not all of those lost lights were reclaimed. Some were deemed too costly, some too dangerous, some were never found again. Pandora was one such name. It appeared only as a fragment in a degraded data scroll recovered from a derelict exploration vessel drifting at the edge of Segmentum Obscurus. The vessel's crew had long since been reduced to dust and gene ash, their final vox logs corrupted beyond recovery. All that remained was a partial stellar chart, an orbital notation referring to a habitable moon, and a single repeated phrase etched into the ship's cogitator core, as if burned there by terror or reverence. The world lives. At first, the record was dismissed as meaningless. Explorators encounter exaggerations constantly. Feral superstition, warp-induced madness, metaphor mistaken for fact. But the phrase refused to fade. Cross-referenced against ancient rogue trader routes and pre-imperial survey markers, the data revealed something unsettling. The system had been visited, logged, and then deliberately removed from active imperial cartography. No record explained why. The Ordo Xenos took interest. Interest within the Inquisition is never passive. It is a blade held just out of sight. An Ordo Xenos inquisitor petitioned for an expedition under sealed writ, citing the possibility of a persistent Xenos ecosystem coexisting with human populations. The suggestion alone was enough to raise alarm. Humanity surviving alongside aliens without extermination or enslavement was not merely unlikely, it was ideologically dangerous. A small fleet was assembled, not a crusade, but not a survey either. Void ships bearing the sigils of the Inquisition, escorted by Mechanicus vessels heavy with Auspex arrays and sanctified scanners. A regiment of the Imperial Guard was attached under pretense of security, along with ecclesiarchy observers to assess spiritual contamination. Each institution claimed the mission served the Emperor's will. None trusted the others. As the fleet translated into the system, the first anomaly manifested. The warp calmed. Not violently, not suddenly, but as if something vast and patient had noticed their arrival and chosen stillness over resistance. Astropaths reported an unnatural quiet, a pressure that did not wound the soul, but weighed upon it, like a presence listening rather than speaking. Such reports were logged, classified, and quietly ignored. Then the moon came into view. Pandora. From orbit, it was impossibly green, not in the fractured, polluted sense of imperial agri-worlds, nor the artificial uniformity of Mechanicus terraform projects. This was organic, chaotic, layered. Vast forests sprawled across continents, interrupted by mountains that seemed torn from the planet's crust and suspended impossibly in the sky. Storms moved with strange deliberation. Oceans pulsed with bioluminescent patterns visible even from void altitude. Auspex readings conflicted violently. Atmospheric toxicity fluctuated beyond acceptable margins, yet vast populations of life thrived. Energy signatures suggested a planetary-scale bioelectrical network, but no technological infrastructure could be detected. The moon was alive in a way no imperial lexicon adequately described. And then came the second revelation. Humans. Scattered across the surface were settlements unmistakably human in origin. Not hive cities, not manufactorums. Small, integrated communities woven into the environment itself. No void shields, no macro cannons, no signs of industry beyond the bare necessities of survival. Genetic scans confirmed them as baseline human stock, altered only slightly by long-term environmental adaptation. They were not feral in the imperial sense. They were not degenerate. They were not ignorant. They had chosen this life. Initial contact was made through Vox transmission, translated into Low Gothic after some delay. The response was calm, cautious, and deeply unsettling to the Imperials listening. The humans of Pandora did not ask for salvation. They did not beg for protection. They did not rejoice at reunion with the Imperium of Man. They asked only one question: why have you returned? Before further dialogue could proceed, the third truth revealed itself. They were not alone. Tall figures moved within the forests beneath the canopy, tracked only briefly by motion sensors before vanishing entirely. Humanoid, but not human. Stronger, faster, perfectly adapted to the moon's hostile beauty. Auspex pict captures showed blue-hued skin, elongated limbs, and neural appendages that interfaced directly with the native fauna. Xenos. The ecclesiarchy observers began reciting litanies of purification. The Mechanicus Magi demanded immediate biological samples. The Imperial Guard commanders requested authorization to establish beachheads and secure landing zones. And somewhere deep within Pandora's forests, something ancient stirred. Not in anger, not in fear, but in awareness. For the first time in centuries, Pandora was no longer alone in the galaxy, and the galaxy had noticed it. The Imperium had come, armed with faith, fire, and certainty. Pandora had no fleets, no gods of war, no grand armies. It had only life. And in the 41st millennium, life itself is an act of defiance. The fleet emerged from the warp without ceremony, without the thunderous distortion that often accompanied translation into unstable systems. Instead, real space asserted itself with an unsettling smoothness, as if the immaterium itself had released its grip willingly. Void shields stabilized, plasma drives idled down to cruising output. For a brief moment, one that no officer aboard would later admit to appreciating, the stars were still. That stillness was wrong. Imperial crews are trained to recognize danger in excess, excessive radiation, excessive warp turbulence, excessive hostile signals. They are less prepared for the absence of threat indicators, for the sensation that something vast has chosen not to resist. On the bridge of the Inquisitorial flagship, Auspex officers exchanged glances as their instruments returned clean readings far too quickly, far too neatly. The system was old, that much was immediately clear. The primary star burned with a steady, mature output, its light unmarred by violent flares or unstable emissions. The inner system was dominated by a gas giant of colossal mass, its atmosphere wrapped in endless bands of color, storm systems spiraling with energies that would have torn lesser worlds apart. Orbiting that giant was a single moon, large, dense, and impossibly vibrant. Pandora. The name appeared on command displays as a recovered designation, its data tag incomplete, its origin buried beneath layers of corrupted archive code. It should have meant nothing. Instead, it carried weight. Several senior officers felt it, an involuntary tightening of the chest, a pressure behind the eyes. None spoke of it. In the Imperium, unshared discomfort is preferable to acknowledged doubt. As the fleet adjusted course and began its approach, reports began arriving from the astropaths. Their voices were controlled, disciplined, but strained beneath ritual calm. The warp, they claimed, had grown quiet upon entry into the system, not silent in the dead sense, but hushed, as though something vast listened rather than spoke. Psychic background noise, normally a constant roar of distant agony, devotion, and madness, had diminished to a low, steady presence. The reports were logged. The anomaly was downgraded. The fleet continued. Optical augers activated as Pandora rotated into full view. What they revealed defied standard Imperial categorization. Vast forests covered the surface in layers upon layers of dense growth, broken only by luminous oceans and mountain ranges that seemed torn from the crust itself. Entire land masses hovered above the surface, suspended by forces no Mechanicus equation could immediately explain. Lightning danced between floating peaks, arcing with unnatural regularity. The moon was alive. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, alive in measurable, quantifiable ways. Auspex readings flooded the cogitators with contradictions. Atmospheric toxicity fluctuated wildly, yet remained survivable. Biosignatures were everywhere, billions upon billions of them, interconnected through faint but persistent electrical impulses that stretched across continents. Energy readings suggested a planetary-scale bioelectrical network, yet no reactors, no power conduits, no industrial scars marked the surface. The Adeptus Mechanicus delegation reacted with immediate agitation. Tech priests clustered around data shrines, mechadendrites twitching as streams of information poured directly into their noospheres. Binary cant spilled from vox grills as they attempted to reconcile doctrine with observation. The planet produced energy without sanctified machinery. It regulated itself without control systems. It functioned without obedience. To the cult Mechanicus, this was not wonder, it was blasphemy. The ecclesiarchy observers reached a different conclusion. They saw a world untouched by imperial suffering, a place where life flourished without penance, where growth was not paid for in blood and ash. Such abundance, unearned through sacrifice, could only be false. In the Imperium, paradise is either a lie or a trap. Orbital scans continued, deeper and more intrusive. That was when the second anomaly revealed itself. Settlements. They were small, scattered, and integrated seamlessly into the terrain. No hive spires pierced the canopy. No manufactorum smoke darkened the skies. Structures were grown rather than built, shaped from living materials that adapted as the environment changed. There were no void shields, no macrocannons, no defense grids of any recognizable imperial pattern. And yet they were unmistakably human. Architectural proportions, internal layouts, and habitation spacing matched no known Xenos species. Gene scans confirmed it moments later. Baseline human DNA. minor deviations consistent with long-term environmental adaptation, but nothing that could justify charges of mutation or abhuman classification. These were not feral remnants, they were not devolved primitives, they were not ignorant of the galaxy. They were survivors who had chosen a different path. The Inquisitor in command ordered a controlled descent, not an invasion, but not a greeting either. Thunderhawks were dispatched in carefully staggered waves, their engines struggling against unpredictable atmospheric currents laced with electromagnetic interference. Several craft reported momentary sensor blackouts as they passed through layers of bioluminescent cloud, though all eventually emerged intact. Landing zones were established at the outskirts of one settlement. The choice was deliberate, visible but not intrusive. Imperial Guard detachments deployed in precise formation, boots pressing into living soil that subtly shifted beneath their weight. Lasguns were held at rest but ready. Banners bearing the sigil of the Aquila were unfurled, their stark imagery violently out of place amid the vibrant greens and glowing blues of Pandora's jungle. The humans emerged slowly. They carried no weapons. Their clothing was simple, woven from organic fibers, adapted to movement and climate rather than display. Their posture was neither submissive nor hostile. They did not kneel. They did not run. They watched. Their faces showed no awe, no terror, no reverence, only caution and something far more unsettling: recognition. They knew what the Imperium was. They knew what those banners meant. They knew what compliance demanded, and they knew what refusal would cost. As Imperial officers prepared to initiate first contact protocols, one realization settled heavily across the command staff. This world had not been waiting to be found. It had been hiding.
The first words exchanged were measured, ritualized, and hollow. Imperial protocol demanded formalities, identification of authority, proclamation of sovereignty, confirmation of compliance expectations. The Inquisitor spoke with a voice trained to command obedience across star systems, each syllable reinforced by centuries of institutional power. He invoked the Emperor of Mankind, Lord of Terra, Master of the Imperium, whose domain extended to every human soul, whether they acknowledged it or not. The humans of Pandora listened. They did not interrupt. They did not protest. They did not kneel. Their stillness unsettled the guard far more than defiance would have. Lasgun safeties clicked off almost unconsciously as soldiers adjusted their grips, scanning the tree line, the elevated growth platforms, the shadowed paths winding deeper into the forest. Nothing moved, yet the sense of being surrounded grew heavier with each passing second. When the Inquisitor finished speaking, silence followed. Not the awkward silence of confusion, but the deliberate pause of people choosing their response carefully. An elder stepped forward. He was tall by Imperial standards, lean rather than muscular, his skin marked by faint bioluminescent patterns that pulsed softly in rhythm with his breathing. Augurs flagged him immediately as human, though modified by generations of environmental adaptation. His eyes were clear, steady, and utterly unafraid. "We know who you are," he said in low Gothic colored by archaic cadence. "Your banners are not unknown to us. Your wars are not forgotten." The Inquisitor narrowed his eyes. "Then you know why we are here." The elder inclined his head slightly. "Yes, you have come to take what you believe was always yours." That was not the correct response. Administratum officials shifted uneasily. Ecclesiarchy observers murmured prayers under their breath, warding gestures tracing the Aquila in the air. This was not ignorance. This was refusal without rebellion, denial without hatred. "We were not lost," the elder continued. "We remained." The words struck deeper than any shouted insult. Lost worlds were a tragedy. Lost people were victims, but to remain, to choose separation, was unthinkable. As negotiations stalled, the Auspex alarms chimed again. Movement. This time, it was not human. Heat signatures bloomed at the edge of detection range, then faded, then reappeared from entirely different vectors. Tall forms slipped between massive roots and glowing undergrowth, their movements impossibly fluid. Targeting reticles struggled to lock, auto-adjusting for speed and erratic trajectories that no baseline humanoid should have been capable of. The Na'vi revealed themselves not with aggression, but with presence. They stepped from the jungle as one, emerging onto elevated branches, rocky outcroppings, and natural platforms overlooking the clearing. Each stood taller than any guardsman present, their blue skin marked with stripes that shimmered faintly in the filtered light. Primitive weapons, bows, spears, blades of hardened organic material were held loosely, yet aimed with unmistakable precision. They did not snarl, they did not shout, they watched. Targeting lasers danced across their chests, orders were barked, countermanded, and barked again. The Imperial Guard stood on the edge of a massacre, waiting for a single wrong movement to justify it. Then something changed. Not visibly, not audibly, but perceptibly. The jungle reacted. Leaves shifted though there was no wind. Bioluminescent flora brightened subtly, casting long shadows that disrupted depth perception and range estimation. Insects rose into the air in coordinated swarms, interfering with optics and clogging air intakes. The ground beneath Imperial boots softened, roots pressing upward just enough to destabilize footing. The environment was not attacking, it was adjusting. Tech priests began reciting binaric error strings as their instruments malfunctioned. Servo skulls drifted off course, their stabilizers overcorrecting until they crashed harmlessly into foliage. Vox traffic degraded into static beyond a few hundred meters, as if the planet itself rejected long-distance intrusion. And beneath it all, that sensation returned, that pressure behind the eyes, that quiet awareness. The Inquisitor felt it then with certainty. This was not coincidence. This was not adaptation. This was response. He raised a hand, signaling a cease in all aggressive posture. Slowly, reluctantly, weapons lowered. The Na'vi did not mirror the gesture, nor did they advance. They remained exactly where they were, as though escalation was no longer necessary. One of the Na'vi stepped forward at last. She was taller than the elder human, her movements controlled, deliberate. At the base of her skull, a neural appendage swayed gently, alive with subtle motion. Her gaze passed over the Imperial soldiers without fear, without hatred, and settled on the Inquisitor. "You are loud," she said, in low Gothic, translated through a compact Vox unit worn by the elder human beside her. "Your thoughts push against the world." The Mechanicus delegation froze. That sentence alone triggered a cascade of doctrinal alarms, direct commentary on perception, on cognition, on presence. This was not a primitive species reacting instinctively. This was awareness bordering on the psychic. "We did not call you," she continued, "but we knew you would come. Others always do." The elder human placed a hand over his chest in a gesture that was neither submissive nor defiant. "This is our home, and theirs. We have lived this way for generations. We do not seek your worlds. We do not spread our ways. We only ask to be left alone." The Inquisitor said nothing for a long moment. He was weighing something far heavier than protocol. The Imperium could take this world, of that there was no doubt. Given time, bodies, and firepower, Pandora could be reduced to compliance or ash, but the cost would be extraordinary, not only in lives, but in uncertainty. Every instinct honed by decades of service whispered the same warning: this world would not break cleanly. As if in answer, a distant thunder rolled across the jungle, not from the sky, but from the land itself. Massive shapes moved far beyond visual range, their footsteps registering as tremors through the soil. Creatures of impossible scale stirred, drawn not for fear, but for imbalance. The Na'vi did not look back. The humans did not flinch. They trusted the world beneath their feet. The Inquisitor finally spoke. "We will observe. We will assess. No judgment will be passed today." The relief among the humans was immediate, though restrained. The Na'vi simply nodded, as if the decision had already been expected. As the Imperials withdrew to their landing zone, watched every step of the way by eyes in the jungle and something far deeper below, one truth settled into the Inquisitor's mind with chilling clarity. Pandora was not undefended. It did not need walls. It did not need armies. It did not even need weapons. It was aware, and it was watching them leave. Pandora's forests stretched endlessly beneath the orbital watch of the Imperium's fleet. From the vantage of orbiting Auspex satellites, the green of the moon was nearly overwhelming, a living tapestry unbroken by walls, roads, or manufactorums. Yet hidden within this vibrant expanse were signs of human habitation, small settlements woven seamlessly into the environment, appearing almost as natural extensions of the great trees themselves. They moved, changed, and grew as organically as the roots and vines surrounding them. To the Imperium, such integration was impossible, and therefore dangerous. The humans who lived here had adapted to the rhythms of Pandora over generations. They walked barefoot across living bridges grown from thick vines and reinforced sapwood, their children darting between the structures with a fearless grace. They understood the patterns of the wildlife, the ebb and flow of the rivers, the storms that swept across the continents. They did not merely survive, they thrived, and in ways the Imperium could not quantify. Early observation revealed something even more extraordinary. These humans had not only survived, but had developed a deep symbiosis with the Na'vi, the native sentient species of Pandora. The relationship was neither dominance nor subjugation. It was cooperation, mutual respect, and understanding. Children learned to hunt alongside Na'vi mentors, adopting their techniques while retaining their own cultural identities. Education was practical, spiritual, and ecological. The world itself was the classroom. Discipline came through necessity and example, not coercion. From orbit, Inquisitorial officers could track daily life, noting that even in the midst of apparent chaos, order reigned, an order that did not resemble the Imperium's rigid structures. There were no manufactorums belching smoke, no factories stamping out conformity, no temples demanding rote devotion to the emperor. And yet the society functioned, flourished, and remained resilient against environmental hazards that would have devastated any conventional colony. This resilience, precise and organic, unsettled the observers. The Imperium's ecclesiarchy voiced immediate concern. How could life prosper without submission to the emperor's will? Was this world under some Xenos influence or heretical guidance? Reports flooded back to the Inquisitor. The humans demonstrated an unusual form of discipline, one that was neither enforced nor violent, yet remarkably effective. Even the youngest children followed protocols for hunting, for crossing rivers, and for engaging with wildlife. Behavior was taught through observation and communal enforcement, and failure carried consequences without cruelty. For the Imperium, such self-regulation without hierarchical enforcement was unfathomable. The Adeptus Mechanicus were no less disturbed. Their scans revealed a planetary bio-network of staggering complexity. Energy flows pulsed faintly through the soil, through the trees, even through the smallest creatures. Nothing in the Mechanicus canon could explain it. The humans interacted with this network effortlessly, influencing minor energy flows without devices or instruments. The Magi muttered about planetary intelligence, about learning without cognition, about systems that optimize themselves and their occupants without any artificial construct. The fleet's data recorders struggled to keep pace, often shutting down under the flood of contradictory signals. Amid this, children played under the watchful eyes of both human and Na'vi elders. They practiced hunting with bows, climbing natural platforms suspended high in the trees, and navigating the rivers without fear. They laughed and called to each other across the canopy, their voices blending with the cries of native fauna. Even from orbit, it was clear these children were fearless, agile, and attuned to the rhythms of the world in ways Imperial psychers could scarcely measure. By midday, the elders convened a council in the shadow of a great tree whose roots penetrated deep into the living soil, entwining with the subterranean neural network. Human elders spoke first, recounting histories passed down for generations, the stories of how their ancestors had arrived, how they had learned to survive, and how they had chosen cooperation over conflict. Their language was melodic, archaic in cadence, yet clear and precise. The Na'vi responded with measured gestures and soft tones, reinforcing the humans' words with affirmations, corrections, and additional lore. The council moved with deliberate grace, their conversations echoing an understanding that surpassed any conventional language barrier. The Inquisitor observed from a discreet vantage, his unease growing with each passing hour. The Imperium demanded conformity, submission, and obedience, yet here on Pandora, humanity had persisted without them. And not only persisted, they had formed a society stronger and more adaptable than the Inquisition could hope to achieve in controlled conditions. The possibility that humans could thrive outside the Imperium's influence was an ideological affront far greater than any Xenos threat. Late in the day, the first direct encounter between Imperial observers and Pandora's children occurred. A group of young humans approached the edge of the forest where hovering servitors monitored them, unafraid, moving with deliberate confidence. They studied the Imperial equipment with no curiosity or reverence, aware of its purpose but unaffected by its authority. One child held out a woven bundle of plants, offering it in a gesture of peace and communication. The Mechanicus recoiled instinctively. The Inquisitor held his tongue. This simple, innocent act carried a weight the Imperium could scarcely comprehend, an assertion of humanity's autonomy framed not in defiance but in understanding. As dusk fell, bioluminescent flora bathed the canopy in gentle light. Children's laughter echoed alongside the hum of Pandora's neural network, and the Na'vi elders guided them through the forest in quiet companionship. The Inquisitor felt a pressing weight settle over him, the undeniable realization that Pandora was not merely a place to be observed, it was a living classroom, a crucible of humanity in harmony with alien life, and it would not be easily broken. And as night descended, with stars scattered above and the green expanse below, one truth became inescapable. Pandora nurtured children of two worlds, and in doing so, it defied the Imperium itself.
The following morning, Pandora awakened with a quiet authority. Mist rose from the rivers and seeped through the canopy, carrying the scent of wet soil, flowering plants, and the faint electrical tang of the planetary bionetwork. The humans and Na'vi moved together through this living cathedral, their paths guided by instinct, experience, and the subtle nudges of the world itself. Every movement was part of a rhythm,
a harmony that the Imperium could not calculate, could not control. The elders convened again, this time to instruct the next generation. Children gathered beneath the branches of a tree whose girth rivaled the largest cathedrals on Terra. The Na'vi demonstrated hunting techniques, releasing arrows that moved with unerring precision, while the humans adapted these lessons into cooperative strategies, merging intuition with practicality. Some children climbed the higher platforms, leaping gracefully between branches, their feet barely disturbing the bark. Their laughter carried, blending with the calls of native creatures, forming a chorus of life that resonated through the network beneath. Imperial observers watched, uneasy. The children did not fear them. They did not whisper of the Emperor. They did not seek to impress or obey. Yet there was discipline here, subtle, self-enforced, woven into every action and choice. Orders were unnecessary because understanding sufficed. Survival and cooperation were the reward, and mistakes became lessons rather than punishments. This society, operating without compulsion, was thriving in ways the Imperium could neither predict nor measure. The Inquisitor convened his council in orbit, studying the data with growing concern. Reports from servitors and augurs depicted scenes that seemed almost unreal. Humans and Na'vi moving together, learning from each other, interacting seamlessly with the living world. Bioluminescent flora responded to movement and sound, subtly shifting to guide, protect, or test the children as they navigated the forest. The planet itself was active, aware, and cooperative with its inhabitants. Mechanicus models collapsed under the complexity, incapable of reconciling intelligence without machinery. Ecclesiarchy officers whispered prayers to shield themselves from the blasphemy of life thriving outside imperial dogma. On the surface, a challenge arose, not from combat, but from understanding. A child misjudged a leap across a wide branch and teetered on the edge. Instantly, the neural network of the forest responded. Leaves swayed to provide a handhold, vines shifted subtly to offer support, and creatures nearby froze to avoid interference. The Na'vi mentor reached out, steadying the child while murmuring guidance. The Imperials, observing from their platforms, were left with a single uncomfortable realization. The planet itself taught. It nurtured, it corrected without punishment. It was alive in a way that made the very concept of authority redundant. The human elders gathered their protégés and spoke of history, of Terra, of humanity's distant past, of the Imperium that existed beyond the stars. But their tone was measured, focused on context rather than obedience. We remember the stars. We remember the worlds we once knew, but they are not ours to claim. Here, we learn from Pandora and from each other. We honor life because life is the teacher. The children listened intently, absorbing lessons not from fear, not from compulsion, but from trust and example. As the day progressed, the Imperium's unease deepened. Observations revealed that the Na'vi were not simply tolerant of the humans, they were partners, guides, and protectors. Joint patrols moved through the forest to ensure safety, teaching stealth, patience, and respect for the ecosystem. Children mirrored these behaviors naturally, integrating into the rhythms of both species. Even imperial servitors struggled to track the fluid dynamics of their interactions, and sensors frequently failed to predict movement or behavior. Every calculation, every projection was confounded by adaptability, cooperation, and the living network beneath their feet. The Inquisitor's final observation of the day was unsettling. In his decades of service, he had seen countless worlds fall, observed countless species bend or break under imperial rule. But Pandora was different. It did not resist through force. It did not hide through fear. It simply existed. And in existing, it taught its children, human and Na'vi alike, to exist in harmony. That very existence was a rebellion of thought, an ideological challenge that could not be crushed with fire or faith alone. As night descended, the bioluminescent forest glowed with soft light, illuminating children at play, elders in discussion, and Na'vi guardians silently moving through the shadows. The Imperials withdrew to their observation posts, the Inquisitor reflecting on a truth he could neither ignore nor act upon. Pandora nurtured life in defiance of expectation. It nurtured understanding in defiance of authority. And it nurtured a new generation of humans who had learned that survival did not require conquest, that obedience did not require oppression, and that the galaxy's harshest truths could be tempered by the living wisdom of a world beyond reckoning. The night deepened, and Pandora exhaled softly, as if in quiet approval. Beneath the canopy, children slept, Na'vi watched, and the world itself hummed with quiet intelligence. Somewhere in the stars above, the Imperium recorded, calculated, and feared. Pandora had created a generation of children of two worlds, and in doing so, it had created something the Imperium could never hope to control. The forests of Pandora were alive in ways that no Imperial surveyor could fully comprehend. Trees of impossible height rose from the ground, their roots entwined with veins of glowing flora, sending pulses of bioluminescent energy through the soil and across vast distances. The air was thick with spores, pheromones, and the subtle electric hum of a planetary bionetwork. Every footfall, every movement, every breath seemed to register across the ecosystem. For the Na'vi, this was home. For the Imperium, it was an enigma. Observation from orbit had shown the Na'vi as guardians, protectors, and sometimes instructors to the human settlers, but up close, their presence became even more imposing. Standing over 2 meters tall, their muscular frames were honed for survival and agility, their skin marked with iridescent stripes that shimmered faintly in the filtered sunlight. Neural tendrils extended from the base of their skulls, connecting seamlessly with the environment, the trees, the creatures, the subtle currents of the planetary bionetwork. Every action was deliberate, every glance calculated, and every movement in harmony with the living world around them. For an Imperial observer, the first encounter in the forest was disorienting. The Na'vi did not approach aggressively, nor did they retreat. They simply existed, moving with a fluidity that seemed impossible to track. Their eyes, large and luminous, studied the intruders with a calm awareness that unnerved even seasoned officers. Even their weapons, primitive bows and spears, were extensions of themselves rather than tools of war. Each arrow loosed or blade raised was precise, controlled, and measured, designed more to communicate capability than to threaten. The Na'vi elders demonstrated a profound understanding of their environment. They taught the human children the art of silent movement, how to listen to the whispers of the forest, how to read the subtle signs of creatures both large and small. Children learned to leap from branch to branch, to balance on the narrow vines that swayed with the canopy, to hunt with patience rather than force. The forest itself responded to them, its plants bending, its creatures pausing, its energy pulses subtly guiding and supporting their movements. Imperial sensors struggled to capture this. Thermal imaging failed to differentiate between the humans, the Na'vi, and the surrounding wildlife. Auspex readings fluctuated wildly, often unable to distinguish individual targets from the living network of the forest. Servitors deployed to record activity malfunctioned repeatedly, their optics blinded by the bioluminescent flora and their sensors confounded by the adaptive intelligence of the ecosystem. Even the Mechanicus Magi were forced to admit that Pandora's living network was more sophisticated than any artificial intelligence or cogitator array they had ever encountered. The Na'vi communicated in ways that transcended speech. Their neural tendrils interfaced with flora and fauna, subtly influencing the behavior of animals and even small energy currents within the network. They could sense the presence of intruders before sight or sound revealed them, and they could convey complex instructions and warnings to each other without words. To the humans, these abilities were interpreted as teachings, lessons in harmony and survival. To the Imperium, they were unnerving, a demonstration of power that defied comprehension and threatened the principle of human supremacy. The children of Pandora were central to this system. They learned not only the skills necessary to survive, but also the philosophy underpinning their coexistence. Every hunt, every climb, every interaction with the environment was a lesson in balance, patience, and respect. The Na'vi guided them not with fear, but with expectation. Mistakes were corrected gently, with instruction rather than punishment. Observing Imperial officers noted that these lessons instilled confidence and discipline without coercion, a concept they had been trained to recognize as impossible. The forest itself seemed to recognize and respond to the Na'vi. Vines would shift subtly to offer support during a difficult climb. Predators would avoid children under the Na'vi's watchful gaze. The ambient energy of the bionetwork seemed to flow more harmoniously when they moved in concert with it. Every action reinforced the lesson. Pandora was alive, and it had chosen these beings as its stewards. Above all, the Na'vi carried the authority of the forest without arrogance. They did not claim dominion over the humans. They guided, protected, and observed. Their culture emphasized connection, responsibility, and understanding rather than conquest. Every arrow loosed, every path chosen, every instruction given was a reminder that life on Pandora was a cooperative endeavor. Authority was earned, not imposed, and the consequences of failure were measured in understanding rather than fear. Imperial observers recorded all of this, their reports filled with terms like adaptive intelligence, biological integration, and xenosymbiosis, but no data could capture the nuance of movement, intention, and awareness demonstrated by the Na'vi. Each attempt to quantify their behavior fell short. The forest was not merely a backdrop, it was an active participant in teaching, protecting, and enforcing the delicate balance that sustained life on Pandora. As night approached, the forest's glow intensified. Bioluminescent plants illuminated the Na'vi and human children alike, casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. Elders led lessons on tracking, stealth, and the rhythms of nocturnal creatures. The children listened, absorbed, and mirrored every movement with careful precision. Imperial observers could do nothing but record, unable to intervene or fully understand. Even the Inquisitor admitted privately that this was a form of mastery over life that the Imperium could not hope to replicate or control. Pandora's living guardians had made their presence undeniable. The Na'vi were not simply protectors, they were inseparable from the world itself. Their skills, their awareness, and their philosophy were inseparable from the forest they defended. And as the night deepened, the Imperium's representatives understood a terrifying truth. They were witnesses to a civilization that required no rulers, no armies, no conquerors, only respect and understanding.
Dawn broke over Pandora with a symphony of light and color. The forest shimmered as the first rays filtered through the canopy, illuminating leaves with shades of green, blue, and violet. Mist clung to the branches, sparkling in the gentle sunlight. The Na'vi moved silently among it, their forms fluid and graceful, blending with the patterns of the forest as though they were an extension of it. Humans, now accustomed to the rhythm of life here, mirrored their movements, learning to move in concert with a world that demanded attention, respect, and patience. Elders called the children together near a grove where massive roots formed natural bridges and platforms. Here, the Na'vi taught not only the physical skills of survival, but also the deeper philosophy of their existence. Life, they explained, was a network. Every action rippled through the world, affecting creatures, plants, and even the energy that bound Pandora itself. A careless step could disrupt this balance, just as thoughtful action could strengthen it. The human children listened with awe, absorbing concepts that the Imperium had never taught: patience, observation, and harmony. The humans began to understand that the forest itself was a teacher. A vine shifted to form a ladder. A bird took flight, guiding them toward a hidden path. Even the soil seemed to pulse beneath their feet, giving subtle cues. The Na'vi instructed them to observe, to interpret, and to respond, not to command or destroy. In these lessons, the children learned humility, realizing that survival on Pandora was not about dominance, but about understanding, connection, and adaptation. Imperial officers stationed in observation posts recorded every movement with unease. Even the Inquisitor found it impossible to categorize what he witnessed. Here was a society that functioned without the rigid hierarchies of the Imperium, a people who relied not on orders, but on trust, cooperation, and the living intelligence of their environment. Reports described Xenos integration and biosymbiosis, but the words felt hollow when faced with the reality: a fully sentient ecosystem, aware and responsive, shaping its inhabitants as much as they shaped it. As the sun rose higher, the Na'vi led the children on lessons in tracking. They moved through the dense forest with incredible precision, listening to the subtle sounds of life: the rustle of a leaf, the snap of a twig, the whisper of the wind through the branches. The human children struggled at first, their instincts honed for structured environments, but with guidance they began to sense patterns and rhythms. They learned to anticipate movements, to blend into shadows, and to respect the creatures they encountered. Each lesson reinforced the notion that survival required empathy and awareness as much as strength or skill. The Inquisitor observed a moment that unsettled him profoundly. A young Na'vi child slipped near a cliff's edge. Without hesitation, the forest responded. Vines stretched to form a safe foothold, a branch lowered to steady the child, and a small bird's flight diverted attention from a nearby predator. No adult imposed intervention. The child recovered through guidance and the living intelligence of the planet itself. The Imperials recorded it all, their minds struggling to reconcile a world that nurtured rather than punished, that taught rather than enforced. By mid-morning, a ritual began. The Na'vi led both children and humans to a grove where massive bioluminescent trees formed a natural amphitheater. Here, the Na'vi taught not only the physical skills of survival, but also the deeper philosophy of their existence. Life, they explained, was a network. Every action rippled through the world, affecting creatures, plants, and even the energy that bound Pandora itself. A careless step could disrupt this balance, just as thoughtful action could strengthen it. The human children listened with awe, absorbing concepts that the Imperium had never taught: patience, observation, and harmony. As the day wore on, humans and Na'vi practiced cooperative exercises, moving together through the forest. They learned to hunt, climb, and navigate without disrupting the ecosystem. Lessons in patience, observation, and communication became second nature. Even minor missteps were corrected gently, with instruction rather than punishment. The forest itself seemed to reinforce the teachings, nudging learners toward the right path. For the first time, the Imperium realized that this was more than education. It was a culture of balance, resilience, and mutual respect. Night returned slowly, bringing with it the soft glow of Pandora's bioluminescence. Children lay asleep beneath the canopy, Na'vi elders keeping watch, their tendrils gently linked with the forest. The planet hummed quietly, a constant reminder that it was alive, aware, and intertwined with its inhabitants. The Imperial could only watch, powerless to enforce order where harmony reigned. The Na'vi had taught the children the rhythms of life, the value of understanding, and the strength of unity. And in doing so, they had created a generation that no conqueror could subdue. And so, as the moon rose over the forest, casting a silver glow on the intertwined branches and roots, the Imperium faced a reality it could not ignore. Pandora was alive. The Na'vi were its guardians, and together with humans, they had built a society where cooperation, respect, and awareness replaced domination, fear, and control. It was a lesson the galaxy had never been taught, and one the Imperium could not unsee.
The Imperial fleet loomed over Pandora like a dark shadow, its massive vessels blotting out the sky as they positioned themselves above the verdant moon. From orbit, the Na'vi and human settlers could see the ominous shapes, a reminder of the galaxy's indifference and the relentless will of the Imperium. For the first time, the humans understood the full weight of the forces that had arrived, bearing not curiosity or inquiry, but an expectation of obedience. On board the largest ship, the commanding officer convened a council. The message was clear. Pandora would submit. Its inhabitants would bend to imperial rule, or they would be eradicated. Documents were read aloud, ultimatums issued, and the language of authority echoed through the corridors. To the Imperials, this was standard procedure. To Pandora's defenders, it was a declaration of war masked as diplomacy. The human settlers, long accustomed to life with the Na'vi, refused to comply. Their loyalty was not merely political, but deeply personal. They had grown alongside these beings, learned from them, and survived because of them. Any attempt to separate them from the Na'vi would be not only culturally catastrophic, but morally unthinkable. The elders of the human communities argued fiercely among themselves, but reached one undeniable conclusion. They would stand with Pandora and its people, whatever the cost. The Na'vi themselves observed silently, yet every movement was deliberate and measured. Neural tendrils pulsed with awareness, spreading through the forest and communicating subtle warnings. The planet itself seemed to resonate with tension, the very air vibrating with anticipation. The forest would not allow interference to go unchecked. To the Na'vi, obedience was irrelevant. The forest required respect, and any threat to its balance would be met with resistance. Imperial Guard regiments were deployed in response to the human defiance. Dropships pierced the canopy, carrying disciplined troops armed with lasguns, autocannons, and mechanized support units. They moved with military precision, intending to establish control, map the terrain, and subjugate any opposition. Yet the moment their boots touched the soil, the environment itself tested them. Roots shifted beneath their feet, vines tangled around equipment, and even small animals appeared unnaturally coordinated, guiding or misdirecting movements in ways that confounded strategy. The humans and Na'vi prepared for the confrontation with urgency and calm. Children were moved to safe zones within the forest, while adults coordinated defensive positions, taking advantage of natural terrain and hidden pathways. The Na'vi elders demonstrated techniques of camouflage, silent movement, and environmental manipulation, teaching humans to use Pandora itself as a shield. Every step, every breath was measured. Survival required total harmony with the world around them. Tension escalated as patrols from the Imperial forces advanced into dense jungle. The soldiers expected submission. Instead, they encountered obstacles that seemed deliberate. Large roots rose to block paths, trees shifted to obscure lines of sight, and the forest itself guided creatures toward positions that created confusion. It was guerrilla resistance orchestrated not solely by the Na'vi, but by Pandora itself, reinforcing the lesson that the world could not be conquered by sheer force. An initial skirmish erupted near the edge of a settlement. Human settlers, armed with improvised weapons and guided by Na'vi tactics, engaged small patrols of the Imperial Guard. Lasgun fire echoed through the trees, but the forest absorbed and redirected, providing cover for the defenders while slowing the advance of the attackers. Even the mechanized units struggled against the uneven terrain and the unpredictable cooperation of local fauna. Every moment demonstrated the futility of expecting compliance from a world that had learned to act as one. The Imperials recorded their observations with a mixture of awe and frustration. Traditional military doctrines failed to account for a living environment that could think, respond, and adapt. Reports filled with terms like Xenos interference, environmental intelligence, and anomalous coordination were sent to higher command. Yet no analysis could truly explain what they faced, a civilization and a planet so intertwined that domination by force alone was impossible. As night approached, the forest's natural glow illuminated defensive positions. Bioluminescent plants cast shifting shadows across hidden paths, revealing the Na'vi and human defenders in ethereal light. The Imperials, observing from fortified positions, noted the subtle organization and discipline of a force that did not rely on technology or hierarchy, but on awareness, cooperation, and connection with the living world. The first contact of enforcement had begun, and Pandora had already taught its first lesson: compliance would not be given freely. Night deepened over Pandora, and the forest became a living labyrinth of light, shadow, and subtle energy. Imperial troops attempted to advance further into the dense jungle, but each step brought new obstacles. Vines shifted to block their paths, roots emerged to trip and ensnare, and creatures moved with uncanny coordination to redirect or confuse the soldiers. It was not merely defense, it was the forest itself asserting dominance, guided by the awareness of the Na'vi and the intelligence of Pandora. The Na'vi elders coordinated quietly from the shadows. Neural tendrils pulsed rhythmically, communicating warnings, strategies, and environmental cues. Human defenders, trained in observation and patience, followed each subtle signal. They moved like water through the undergrowth, silent, deliberate, and impossible to predict. Even the most seasoned Imperial officers began to realize that conventional tactics would fail against a foe that was part human, part planet, and wholly adaptive. Imperial commanders attempted to enforce compliance through intimidation and firepower. Lasguns blazed, and mechanized units moved to cut off hidden paths, but every strategy was anticipated. The forest reacted instantly, diverting creatures, collapsing undergrowth in some areas and opening new routes in others. The soldiers were forced to adapt or risk becoming trapped by an environment that thought and responded faster than their orders could be executed. Among the defenders, human children played an essential role. They guided settlers along safe paths, identified hidden threats, and mirrored the Na'vi's movements to mislead the Imperials.
Their actions demonstrated that survival depended on understanding, cooperation, and attentiveness rather than mere strength. Each successful maneuver reinforced the lesson. Pandora did not submit to force. It required respect, observation, and unity. A critical moment arrived when a small unit of Imperial soldiers attempted to seize a Na'vi encampment. The forest responded immediately. Trees shifted to create barricades, vines formed natural traps, and animals coordinated to isolate and distract the intruders. The defenders used the terrain to their advantage, directing creatures and guiding settlers along hidden escape routes. What could have been a massacre instead became a controlled, orchestrated resistance, a demonstration of intelligence and harmony that the Imperium could not comprehend. The skirmish ended without a decisive victor, but the message was unmistakable. The Imperium could not expect blind obedience from Pandora. Attempts at compliance had been met with coordinated resistance, and every action by the invaders was subtly countered by the environment itself. The forest, the Na'vi, and the human settlers had united to demonstrate that obedience was not optional. It was earned through understanding, not imposed through fear. By the early hours of dawn, the forest had returned to its natural rhythm. Bioluminescent plants dimmed, nocturnal creatures resumed normal patterns, and the Na'vi elders regrouped with the human defenders. Lessons had been reinforced. Vigilance, harmony, and coordination were essential. Imperial forces, meanwhile, retreated to secure positions, forced to reassess their approach in light of a planet and people that refused to submit. As the sun rose, painting the canopy in shades of gold and green, the Imperium faced an uncomfortable reality. Pandora did not yield to threats. The Na'vi were not simply protectors, they were an integral part of a living, intelligent world that would resist domination at every turn. And the humans, bound to this world and its guardians, had made their choice. Compliance was impossible. Coexistence was inevitable, whether the Imperium accepted it or not. The first chapter of open defiance had concluded, but the struggle for control and survival was only beginning. The first light of dawn barely penetrated the dense canopy of Pandora, yet the sounds of war echoed through the jungle. Imperial dropships had descended under the cover of darkness, their engines shaking the treetops and startling every creature in the vicinity. The human settlers and Na'vi stood together, anticipating the conflict that had been inevitable since the demand for compliance was refused. The forest itself seemed to tense, as if aware that a storm of fire, steel, and instinct was about to be unleashed. Imperial Guard units advanced cautiously, las guns raised and mechanized supports rumbling along muddy trails. Their training emphasized precision, order, and control, yet the jungle offered none of the predictable patterns they relied upon. Every step was uncertain. Roots twisted across paths, dense undergrowth obscured vision, and even the terrain seemed to resist their progression. What the Imperials had assumed would be a straightforward demonstration of authority quickly became a living obstacle course designed by a planet that refused to be subdued. The Na'vi and human defenders moved with silent coordination. Elders directed children and settlers to secure positions, teaching them to use the terrain to their advantage. Every tree, every root, every vine became part of the strategy. The defenders did not rely on conventional weapons alone. They employed the living world itself as a force multiplier. Small animals distracted soldiers, predators were guided toward exposed positions, and vines shifted subtly to create natural barricades. Every tactic reinforced the lesson. The jungle fought as one. Initial skirmishes erupted along narrow ridges and hidden clearings. Lasgun fire clashed with arrows loosed from bows, but the jungle absorbed and deflected the energy in unpredictable ways. Imperial troops found themselves unable to advance without risk of ambush, while the defenders moved fluidly through the undergrowth. The Na'vi elders perched silently among the canopy, guided their warriors with subtle gestures, neural tendrils pulsing in harmony with the living network of Pandora. Every coordinated action was a testament to centuries of understanding and adaptation. Human settlers, many armed with improvised weapons and trained in the ways of the Na'vi, proved essential. They led small groups along hidden paths, outflanking Imperial patrols and creating controlled chaos that further slowed the advance. Even the children, nimble and perceptive, contributed by observing enemy patterns, predicting ambushes, and relaying instructions through silent signals. The battlefield was no longer measured by brute force, but by awareness, cunning, and unity with the environment. The Imperial officers struggled to impose order. Command structures failed as the jungle itself intervened. Vines tangled around mechanized units, roots shifted beneath marching formations, and even small animals appeared to coordinate attacks in unexpected directions. Every step forward required careful recalibration. Firepower, discipline, and training could not account for a world that actively resisted through intelligence, not instinct. Every miscalculation resulted in delays, casualties, and growing frustration among the ranks. In one engagement, a squad of Imperial soldiers attempted to flank a Na'vi and human position along a riverbank. The Na'vi had anticipated the maneuver. Neural tendrils pulsed, guiding the flow of water and movement of local wildlife. A sudden surge of fish and amphibians created confusion, while vines rose to create natural barriers. The soldiers were forced to retreat under conditions that no standard military protocol could have predicted. It was a humbling lesson in adaptability, coordination, and respect for the jungle's intelligence. Throughout the day, guerrilla tactics dominated the conflict. Small teams of Na'vi and humans struck swiftly, disappearing before retaliation could be organized. They used the terrain to their advantage, employing camouflage, misdirection, and the jungle itself as a weapon. Predators previously seen as threats were guided to strategically disrupt Imperial formations. Every attack demonstrated an intricate understanding of the planet's ecosystem, proving that the defenders were not merely using the forest, they were part of it. Imperial casualties mounted as the day wore on. Every loss was meticulously recorded, but each report carried an undercurrent of fear and frustration. The soldiers had never faced a battlefield that actively responded to their movements, a jungle that seemed conscious, aware, and deadly in a way that no Xenos encounter had ever prepared them for. Yet the Imperials pressed on, compelled by duty and the rigid mandates of their command structure. Each step deeper into Pandora was a test of endurance, will, and survival. By the afternoon, the defenders had established a network of safe zones and fallback positions. Human children continued to serve as scouts and guides. The Na'vi elders directed from hidden perches, and settlers moved with careful precision to avoid both natural and manufactured threats. Even as the Imperials advanced, they were consistently outmaneuvered, unable to account for the intelligence, cooperation, and adaptation of the defenders combined with the jungle itself. Every encounter reinforced a single truth: Pandora could not be conquered through traditional methods, and every attempt to force compliance came at a tremendous cost. As night fell, the forest's bioluminescent glow illuminated the aftermath of skirmishes. Trees, vines, and fauna reflected the live-in presence of Iwa, the neural network that connected every aspect of the world. Human and Na'vi defenders gathered in small clearings, tending to the wounded and preparing for the next day's engagements. The Imperials retreated to fortified positions, forced to acknowledge the jungle's dominance. The battle had only begun, but the lesson was already clear. Survival depended on harmony, coordination, and respect for a living world that refused to be tamed.
The jungle seemed to come alive under the pale light of Pandora's twin moons. Sounds of movement, branches creaking, leaves rustling, distant animal calls were amplified in the tense night. Imperial forces, fatigued and disoriented, struggled to maintain cohesion. Even mechanized units were slowed by the uneven terrain, thick foliage, and the subtle but deliberate manipulation of the environment. Every step forward felt like wading through a sentient obstacle, a reminder that the forest itself was a participant in the conflict. Na'vi warriors perched in the canopy watched the troops below, their eyes sharp and movements deliberate. Neural tendrils pulsed rhythmically, linking with the roots, vines, and fauna to coordinate ambushes, distractions, and safe passages. Human settlers moved alongside them, carrying weapons and tools adapted for guerrilla tactics. The synergy between species was remarkable. Children relayed signals, elders orchestrated defensive patterns, and every defender understood that survival was inseparable from their environment. In one clearing, an Imperial squad attempted a frontal assault. Lasgun fire echoed through the trees, but the defenders anticipated the attack. Vines shifted to form barricades, branches subtly redirected movement, and the ground itself seemed to shift underfoot. Small creatures appeared to swarm the attackers in organized patterns, herding them toward positions already prepared by the Na'vi and human defenders. It was a coordinated defense without command posts or radios, orchestrated entirely through intuition, experience, and the intelligence of Pandora. The battle raged for hours. Each skirmish tested endurance, strategy, and adaptability. Imperial forces attempted to suppress the defenders through brute force, but every measure was countered by the jungle's living defenses. Guerrilla tactics became increasingly effective. Ambushes, misdirection, and the manipulation of natural elements allowed the Na'vi and humans to strike repeatedly while remaining largely unseen. Even the most disciplined Imperial soldiers found themselves exhausted, frustrated, and increasingly cautious. Human children continued to play a crucial role. Agile and perceptive, they guided settlers through hidden paths, identified enemy weaknesses, and relayed subtle signals to coordinate ambushes. Their training under the Na'vi allowed them to anticipate predator behavior, navigate difficult terrain, and understand the rhythms of the jungle. Each child became a vital link in the chain of survival, demonstrating that knowledge and intuition were as powerful as any weapon. Imperial officers tried to reorganize their units for a coordinated strike at dusk. However, the forest resisted predictability. Vines rose to block pathways, small animals interfered with movement, and bioluminescent plants altered patterns of visibility, creating confusion and slowing the advance. Attempts to enforce discipline were met with frustration as soldiers encountered resistance that could not be quantified, measured, or subdued. The jungle itself had become a force multiplier for the defenders. By midnight, the battle had reached a critical point. Several Imperial squads were trapped in narrow ravines, surrounded by carefully manipulated terrain. Vines ensnared mechanized units, and small creatures coordinated attacks on exposed soldiers. The Na'vi elders guided the human defenders in precise maneuvers, teaching them to use the jungle's intelligence as both shield and weapon. What might have been a massacre turned into a demonstration of strategic mastery, showing that survival depended on understanding the environment rather than attempting to dominate it. Casualties mounted for both sides, yet the Imperials could not claim victory. Each loss was recorded with meticulous precision, but the broader truth was undeniable. The defenders, guided by knowledge of the jungle, had maintained control of the battlefield. The forest's influence ensured that every Imperial action was countered, every misstep punished, and every attempt at compliance thwarted. It was a war unlike any the soldiers had ever known, fought against a conscious, adaptive world. As dawn approached, the surviving Imperial units regrouped in fortified positions. They were shaken,
exhausted, and forced to admit that their assumptions about conquest had been challenged at every turn. The Na'vi and human defenders, while tired, had successfully defended their territories, using the jungle and their knowledge to turn every challenge into a lesson in survival. The alliance between species and environment proved unbreakable, an unspoken declaration that Pandora would never submit. The first full cycle of battle ended without a decisive victor, but the message was clear. The jungle, the Na'vi, and the humans had established a balance of power. Attempts to enforce compliance through fear, firepower, or strategy had failed. Survival required adaptation, cooperation, and harmony with the living world. The Imperials were forced to acknowledge an uncomfortable reality. Pandora was alive, aware, and unwilling to yield. The war in the Green Hell had only begun, yet the defenders had already proven that domination was impossible without understanding.
The morning mist clung to the massive trees of Pandora, shrouding the jungle in a ghostly haze. The previous day's battles had left scars on the forest, though even in damage, the jungle seemed to pulse with latent energy, as if absorbing the memory of every footstep, every shot fired, every creature moved. The human settlers and Na'vi stood together among the wreckage, tending the wounded and observing the subtle signals of the planet. Awa's presence was palpable, a living awareness threading through roots, vines, and creatures alike. Imperial commanders planned a decisive offensive, confident that sheer firepower could finally assert dominance. Armored columns advanced along cleared paths, dropships deployed reinforcements, and mechanized units rumbled forward with disciplined precision. Their orders were simple: break the defenders' lines, seize strategic positions, and enforce compliance. Yet with each movement, the forest subtly shifted, revealing that Pandora's intelligence had been quietly observing, learning, and preparing for a response far beyond human comprehension. The Na'vi elders called upon the full extent of their neural connection to Awa. Their tendrils intertwined with roots, branches, and the creatures of the jungle, forming a vast network of awareness. Every pulse, every subtle shift in energy was communicated across the defenders' positions. Human settlers, trained in the ways of the Na'vi, felt the resonance, sensing danger before it arrived, reading predator movements, and anticipating the Imperials' tactics. The offensive that had seemed inevitable now encountered an intelligence that could not be measured or controlled. Initial skirmishes erupted as Imperial units pressed forward. Lasguns and autocannons fired into the thick jungle, but the forest itself responded. Massive roots rose from the soil to entangle armored units. Vines coiled to trip soldiers, and creatures guided by neural impulses appeared in patterns of deliberate interference. Even the terrain seemed conscious. Soil shifted, small streams redirected flow, and foliage adjusted to obscure movements. The defenders, human and Na'vi alike, moved in perfect coordination with this living network, striking at exposed targets while remaining largely unseen. Awa's influence became increasingly apparent. Energy pulses, faint but undeniable, rippled through the battlefield. Soldiers felt a subtle disorientation, their instruments malfunctioned, and even servitors recorded anomalies that defied explanation. Neural patterns of the Na'vi intertwined with the forest, guiding them to positions of advantage and allowing them to anticipate Imperial movements with uncanny accuracy. What had begun as a simple defense escalated into a demonstration of planetary awareness manifesting as strategic superiority. Human children continued to play a critical role, moving nimbly through the undergrowth, relaying signals, and guiding settlers. They had learned to interpret the subtle pulses of Awa, translating them into movement and action that gave the defenders an almost supernatural edge. Their actions were quiet, deliberate, and essential.
Each child, though small in stature, became a link in a chain of intelligence stretching across the forest, integrating the natural world with human initiative in ways the Imperium could not anticipate. A major engagement unfolded near a river delta. Imperial forces attempted to flank the defenders, but the jungle responded instantly. Trees bent subtly to create barriers, vines surged to redirect troops, and local fauna moved in coordinated patterns to divide attention and obstruct progress. The defenders countered with precision, exploiting every environmental advantage. Arrows flew silently from the canopy, improvised projectiles struck with deadly accuracy, and even small animals acted as guides, creating confusion and opportunity simultaneously. Awa's intelligence was no longer abstract, it was an active participant in the battle. The chaos of combat revealed the limitations of Imperial firepower. Mechanized units were immobilized by the terrain. Infantry became entangled in living obstacles, and command structures struggled to maintain coherence. Orders, clear in theory, were rendered ineffective by the constant adaptive responses of the jungle. Every action taken by the Imperials was met with subtle countermeasures, whether through environmental manipulation, the coordination of defenders, or the intelligent movement of creatures. Awa was awakening, asserting influence over the conflict, and demonstrating that conventional conquest was impossible. By mid-afternoon, a remarkable pattern had emerged. The defenders, fully integrated with the forest, controlled the flow of battle. Human settlers moved in concert with the Na'vi, exploiting the terrain and the energy of Awa to anticipate and counter every Imperial maneuver. Even the smallest gestures, adjustments of posture, whispered signals, or shifts in focus were amplified across the neural network, creating a coordination that was precise, fluid, and unstoppable. The battlefield was alive, thinking and responding with an intelligence that no machine could replicate. Casualties mounted on the Imperial side, and morale began to falter. Soldiers, trained for domination and control, faced an opponent that was invisible, omnipresent, and unpredictable. The jungle's defense was not a single entity, but a network of awareness linking Na'vi, humans, creatures, and plants into a cohesive, responsive system. Every attempt to impose order was thwarted not by superior force, but by the understanding and harmony of the defenders with their world. As night fell, bioluminescent flora illuminated the battlefield in eerie hues of blue and green. The Imperials regrouped, exhausted and bewildered. Every assessment confirmed what their instruments could not fully describe. Awa was no longer a distant concept, but an undeniable active intelligence. The forest breathed, pulsed, and guided the defenders with a precision that defied logic. Every movement of the Imperials was anticipated, every strategy countered, and every attempt to domination challenged. By the early hours, it became clear that the balance of power had shifted dramatically. The defenders had survived the major offensive intact, and the forest itself had asserted its presence in a tangible, undeniable way. Human settlers and children, fully integrated with the Na'vi and the energy of Awa, had become extensions of the planet's intelligence. For the Imperium, the reality was undeniable. Pandora was alive, Awa had awakened, and the consequences of further aggression would be catastrophic.
The jungle of Pandora pulsed with life as the night deepened, a living, breathing testament to Awa's awakening. The human settlers and Na'vi defenders moved through the dense foliage with a sense of purpose and connection that transcended ordinary perception. Every step, every gesture, every glance was in tune with the neural rhythm of the planet, creating a harmony that amplified both their awareness and their effectiveness. Imperial forces, in contrast, stumbled blindly through the undergrowth, unprepared for a battlefield that seemed to anticipate their every move. Imperial units attempted to reorganize under the dim glow of bioluminescent plants.
Commanders barked orders, trying to impose structure and direction, but every command was challenged by the living world itself. Roots and vines shifted to block pathways, animals disrupted patrols, and the terrain morphed subtly to obscure visibility. Sensors malfunctioned under the influence of Iowa's energy, creating readings that made no sense. Every soldier felt it, the subtle pressure of an intelligence watching, guiding, and adapting to their presence. The forest had become a participant in the war, an entity as strategic as any commander, as precise as any tactician, and infinitely patient. The Na'vi elders, perched high in the canopy, orchestrated the defense with neural tendrils pulsing like conductors leading an unseen orchestra. Small creatures were guided to create diversions, vines and roots subtly manipulated terrain, and human settlers navigated the jungle with precision, communicating silently through gestures, signals, and instinct. Each action reinforced the understanding that Iowa's network was a vast, conscious system, one that integrated the defenders seamlessly with the living world around them. The Imperials could neither predict nor dominate it. A critical confrontation erupted near the ruins of an ancient settlement. Imperial mechanized units advanced to secure the area, hoping to demonstrate force and intimidate the defenders. Yet the forest reacted instantaneously. Massive roots surged to entangle vehicles, vines wrapped around weaponry, and small creatures, guided by Iowa's network, moved in precise coordination to harass and misdirect. Human settlers and Na'vi warriors struck from hidden positions, exploiting openings created by the jungle itself. What had seemed like overwhelming power was rendered ineffective by the living intelligence surrounding it. The children, trained in the subtle art of reading the jungle, played a crucial role in maintaining coordination. They scouted ahead, warned of ambushes, and acted as messengers across the defenders' positions. Their actions were amplified by Iowa, allowing them to guide movements with an almost preternatural awareness. Every flanking maneuver, every diversion, every defensive position was enhanced by the integration of human intuition and planetary intelligence. The battlefield was no longer merely fought by combatants. It was a collaboration of species and environment operating in perfect synchrony. As the night progressed, Imperial casualties increased. Soldiers grew weary and frustrated as every tactic, every strategic maneuver was countered by forces they could not comprehend. The jungle's response was subtle, yet absolute, demonstrating that Iowa's awakening was not merely passive observation, but active participation in defense. Every misstep by the Imperials triggered adaptive countermeasures. Every attempt at domination met with resistance that combined intelligence, patience, and precise timing. The defenders capitalized on this advantage. Guerrilla tactics intensified, coordinated by neural impulses and guided by Iowa's energy. Arrows flew silently from the canopy. Improvised projectiles struck with deadly accuracy, and even small animals contributed to the disruption of Imperial movements. Terrain was used strategically. Narrow passages, elevated ridges, and riverbanks became tools of defense rather than mere geography. The forest itself became a weapon wielded with unparalleled intelligence and purpose. By the early hours of morning, the battle had reached a turning point. The Imperial offensive had collapsed under the weight of a coordinated, intelligent resistance. Mechanized units were immobilized, infantry was exhausted, and every attempted advance was thwarted by forces they could not fully perceive. Iowa had become undeniable, a living intelligence guiding the defenders, enhancing their coordination and asserting control over the battlefield in ways that no weapon or command could match. The human settlers and Na'vi gathered in a central clearing, assessing their situation and tending to the wounded. Every participant recognized the profound change that had occurred. The awakening of Iowa was not merely symbolic, but an active, sentient force that had shaped the outcome of the battle. The planet's neural network had asserted itself fully, demonstrating both its power and its intelligence, leaving no doubt that future conflicts would require a level of respect, understanding, and harmony never before demanded of human or imperial forces. Imperial commanders, watching from distant fortified positions, were forced to acknowledge a truth that could not be ignored. Pandora was alive. Iowa was awake. Every attempt to impose domination had failed, and further aggression promised only escalating disaster. The implications rippled through the ranks. Supply lines were vulnerable, strategies were obsolete, and conventional tactics could achieve nothing against a living, conscious world. Even the most disciplined officers understood that survival required adaptation, humility, and recognition of a force far beyond their comprehension. As dawn broke over the canopy, illuminating the battlefield in gold and green, a silence fell. The forest seemed to exhale, a pulse of awareness radiating outward as though to confirm its triumph. Human settlers and Na'vi shared a quiet moment of connection, knowing that the awakening of Iowa had altered the balance irrevocably. Imperial forces, exhausted and shaken, retreated into the shadows, forced to confront the reality that conquest of Pandora was impossible without acknowledging the intelligence, unity, and power of the world itself. The first act of planetary consciousness had been revealed, and the galaxy would never view Pandora the same way again.
The aftermath of Iowa's awakening left the Imperial forces in a state of exhaustion and disbelief. Supply lines had been disrupted, forward positions were compromised, and morale among the troops plummeted as they faced a reality that no doctrine had prepared them for. Every attempt to control or dominate the defenders had failed, and the jungle's intelligence seemed to grow stronger with each encounter. Commanders were forced to rethink their strategies, realizing that conquest on Pandora was not a matter of firepower or numbers, but of understanding a living, conscious world. Human settlers and Na'vi had established secure zones, carefully coordinating movements and fortifying positions without reliance on conventional structures. The forest itself acted as a protective ally, covering escape routes, signaling dangers, and redirecting threats with subtlety that no machine could replicate. Children continued to play crucial roles, moving silently, relaying information, and anticipating enemy tactics with an intuition amplified by their connection to Iowa. Every participant in the defense had become a part of the living network, a link in a chain of awareness that extended through every root, vine, and creature. Imperial officers convened in desperate councils, their discussions filled with frustration and growing fear. Reports of casualties, failed maneuvers, and inexplicable phenomena cluttered communication channels. Soldiers described entire units being disoriented, mechanized supports immobilized, and small enemy squads appearing in positions impossible to anticipate. Even the most experienced commanders struggled to reconcile their training with the jungle's adaptive responses. They began to comprehend that Pandora itself had become a tactical entity far beyond their capacity to dominate. The jungle's resistance became increasingly aggressive and coordinated. Predator packs moved with almost military precision, guided by Iowa's awareness, striking at isolated Imperial detachments. Roots and vines shifted subtly to create ambushes, while hidden paths allowed Na'vi and human defenders to maneuver undetected. Even minor skirmishes became complex engagements, where every action by the Imperials was anticipated and countered.
what might have been simple suppression turned into a protracted struggle against a world that would not bend to human will. Throughout the forest, small groups of settlers and children served as critical links in the defensive network. Their knowledge of the terrain, understanding of Awa's signals, and cooperation with the Na'vi allowed them to execute maneuvers that seemed almost prescient. They guided wounded soldiers to safe zones, redirected creatures to disrupt enemy movements, and relayed subtle alerts that prevented potential disasters. Their actions were vital, proving that survival required more than brute strength. It demanded awareness, foresight, and harmony with the living world. Imperial supply lines began to fail catastrophically. Convoys were disrupted by shifting terrain, ambushes, and the unpredictable intelligence of the jungle itself. Mechanized units were slowed or immobilized by roots and mud, while infantry found themselves overextended and fatigued. Even communications were compromised as devices registered inexplicable energy fluctuations, likely linked to Awa's planetary network. The Imperials had entered Pandora expecting compliance and control, yet every logistical operation highlighted their vulnerability and the futility of their mission without adaptation. The financial and strategic cost of continued engagement became increasingly apparent. Resources intended for conquest were consumed in survival and repeated attempts to regain lost ground. Soldiers faced psychological strain as the environment resisted every order, and reports of anomalies reached the highest echelons of command. Officers were forced to accept that Pandora's ecosystem had become an enemy in its own right, operating with an intelligence that could not be destroyed or circumvented through conventional means. In one particularly harrowing encounter, an Imperial unit attempted to clear a settlement thought to be lightly defended. The defenders anticipated the attack. Vines rose to entangle vehicles, branches shifted to obscure sight lines, and small creatures coordinated distractions with startling efficiency. The attackers became disoriented, overextended, and vulnerable, forcing a retreat under the guidance of the defenders and the adaptive intelligence of Awa. It was a vivid illustration that the jungle was not merely a battlefield, but an active participant capable of teaching lessons through action rather than words. By the late hours of night, the defenders had solidified their positions, while the Imperials regrouped, weary and demoralized. Casualties continued to mount, supply issues worsened, and command structures frayed under the pressure of a jungle that resisted domination at every turn. The cost of conquest became undeniable. Every advantage gained by firepower and numbers was offset by the living intelligence of Pandora, the coordination of its inhabitants, and the unyielding presence of Awa. The battlefield had shifted from a war of weapons to a struggle of understanding and endurance. As dawn approached, the defenders observed the battlefield from elevated ridges and concealed positions. The full scope of the jungle's defense became apparent. Fallen Imperial equipment was scattered, paths were altered by roots and vegetation, and the survivors moved cautiously, aware that every moment exposed them to potential ambushes. The Na'vi elders coordinated repairs to natural defenses, guided humans in recovery operations, and ensured that the neural network remained fully operational. The jungle had survived the first major waves of Imperial assault, and the cost to the invaders had been far higher than anticipated.
The jungle of Pandora seemed to breathe in quiet triumph as the second day of engagement unfolded. Imperial forces, exhausted and demoralized, struggled to maintain cohesion. Every path, every clearing, every ridge appeared subtly altered by the intelligence of Awa, guiding defenders and obstructing invaders in ways that no human mind could fully anticipate.
Mechanized units sank into hidden bogs. Infantry became entangled in roots and vines, and even the simplest attempts to advance were met with a living resistance that adapted continuously to their tactics. Na'vi warriors moved fluidly through the undergrowth, perched silently in trees, and coordinated strikes using gestures, neural pulses, and the forest itself. Human settlers followed in perfect synchrony, guided by children who relayed subtle warnings and indicators. Each defender was a part of a vast, conscious network, and the battlefield itself responded to every threat and every maneuver with precision. To the Imperials, it was disorienting and terrifying. A war fought not only against beings, but against the will of a living planet. Attempts at frontal assaults proved catastrophic. Imperial commanders ordered mechanized units to breach fortified areas, only to find themselves immobilized by roots that had shifted overnight, vines that blocked paths, and terrain that seemed to shift subtly as though aware of their presence. Infantry units faced ambushes from every angle, arrows loosed from the canopy, projectiles from hidden humans, and coordinated attacks by native fauna. Each engagement reinforced a single, undeniable truth. Pandora could not be conquered through conventional force. Supply lines continued to fail. Convoys carrying rations, ammunition, and reinforcements were delayed or destroyed by natural obstacles, ambushes, and environmental manipulation. Even automated systems faltered as AWA's presence interfered with sensors, communication arrays, and mechanized guidance. Commanders attempted to maintain morale through rigid orders, but soldiers began to question the feasibility of their mission. The cost of conquest was no longer a measure of casualties alone, but of psychological endurance and strategic futility. Despite these overwhelming challenges, the defenders pressed their advantage. The Na'vi and human settlers utilized every aspect of the jungle to their benefit. Small children scouted ahead, reading patterns in fauna and terrain, warning of Imperial movements and guiding allies to safe positions. Elders coordinated attacks, ensuring that every ambush, every distraction, and every defensive maneuver was optimized by the intelligence of AWA. The planet's network amplified every human and Na'vi action, creating a force multiplier that rendered the Imperials' greatest advantages irrelevant. One particularly fierce engagement occurred near a river crossing. Imperial forces attempted to secure a strategic point to control movement through the jungle, yet AWA responded instantly. Floodwaters shifted subtly, fallen trees blocked approach routes, and creatures moved in patterns that disrupted Imperial formations. Na'vi and human defenders struck from concealed positions, forcing the attackers to retreat under conditions that exposed the limits of their planning and the futility of relying solely on firepower. Every attempt to impose order was countered by a living intelligence, demonstrating that conquest required more than guns and discipline. By the late afternoon, the cumulative effects of the jungle's resistance were undeniable. Soldiers were exhausted, equipment was damaged, and command structures struggled to function under the constant strain of adaptive opposition. Imperial officers recorded each anomaly, each failure, yet no report could fully convey the truth of Pandora, a world alive, aware, and wholly resistant to domination. The cost of conquest extended beyond mere casualties. It was the realization that the planet itself had become a strategic adversary, guiding and protecting its defenders in ways beyond comprehension. As night fell, bioluminescent flora lit the battlefield in eerie, shifting patterns. The defenders regrouped, tending the wounded and reinforcing natural fortifications. Every tree, every root, every animal movement reinforced the sense that the jungle was a living shield, one that would not allow the Imperials to claim victory through traditional methods. The human and Na'vi settlers and children, fully integrated with Na'vi guidance and Awa's network, moved confidently through the shadows, preparing for the next wave of assault, while the invaders hesitated, wary of further losses. By the early hours, the Imperials understood the magnitude of their predicament. Every advance, every skirmish, every attempt to assert control had been met with resistance that combined intelligence, coordination, and environmental mastery. Supply lines had failed, morale was deteriorating, and the battlefield itself had become a living entity opposing them. The cost of conquest was no longer theoretical. It was measured in lives lost, strategies failed, and the growing awareness that Pandora could not be subdued without immense sacrifices the Imperium was unprepared to make. The defenders, meanwhile, observed the battlefield with quiet confidence. Human and Na'vi alike recognized that their integration with the jungle, the guidance of children, and the awakening of Awa had shifted the balance irrevocably. Every Imperial maneuver had been countered, every attempt to domination thwarted, and every step forward made painfully costly. Pandora had asserted its intelligence and power, teaching the Imperium that survival, respect, and understanding were the only viable paths forward. The cost of conquest was clear. Dominance without comprehension was impossible, and the jungle, the Na'vi, and the humans had proven that lesson beyond doubt.
High in the orbit of Pandora, far above the dense forests and the chaotic remnants of battle, the Ordo Xenos convened an emergency council. The grand chamber aboard the orbital fortress was austere, illuminated by cold, artificial light that did little to soften the severity of the occasion. Inquisitors of differing temperaments and specialties gathered, some hardened by decades of investigation into alien threats, others recently elevated to positions of influence, their eyes wide with the grim realities of the galaxy's unrelenting darkness. The room hummed with tension, a silent acknowledgement that the fate of an entire world, and potentially the wider sector, was under deliberation. The council opened with a report from field operatives. Imperial soldiers and tech priests had returned fragmented accounts of a planet that defied comprehension. Iwa, the living neural network of Pandora, was no mere anomaly. It was an active intelligence that had coordinated the defense of human settlers and Na'vi alike. Maps had been altered overnight, patrols disappeared without trace, and mechanized units had been immobilized by phenomena that were documented meticulously but remained unexplained. Each presentation reinforced the fact that Pandora had resisted the Imperium in ways unprecedented in known records. Three dominant factions emerged immediately within the council. The first advocated exterminatus, arguing that the world itself, its sentient intelligence, and the Na'vi population represented an uncontainable threat. To them, any further contact was too dangerous, and destruction of the biosphere by orbital bombardment or virus deployment was the only way to ensure safety and compliance with the Imperium's doctrine. Their rhetoric was rigid, unwavering, and steeped in centuries of precedent, emphasizing the necessity of absolute control and the eradication of potential Xenos corruption. The second faction proposed radical exploitation, asserting that Pandora's unique biosphere, its energy networks, and the coordination of Iwa could be harnessed for imperial advantage. They argued that with sufficient study, the intelligence of the planet could be leveraged as a resource, perhaps even a weapon against other foes of the Imperium. Their vision was ambitious, bordering on hubris, envisioning the manipulation of the Na'vi and settlers to serve the Imperial's broader goals while minimizing immediate risk. This faction recognized the danger of Iwa, but saw opportunity in its very existence. The third faction suggested quarantine, advocating for containment and observation rather than immediate destruction or exploitation.
They argued that Pandora's unique ecosystem and the intelligence that had awakened could not be fully understood, and that attempts to conquer or manipulate it prematurely would result in catastrophic failure. Quarantine meant isolation, orbital monitoring, strict containment of Imperial access, and careful documentation of the world's behavior while preventing direct interference. They warned that rash decisions could provoke retaliation or unknown consequences, both for Imperial forces and for adjacent systems. Debate in the chamber grew heated. Each faction presented evidence, testimonies, and recorded encounters from the field. The exterminatus advocates described the destruction wrought by Pandora's defenses, emphasizing the futility of conventional tactics. Radical exploitation proponents countered with the potential value of the neural network and the biosphere, highlighting human settlements as evidence that cooperation might be possible. Quarantine supporters repeatedly stressed caution, noting that Iwa's influence could extend far beyond the immediate battlefield, and that a miscalculated response might create consequences the Imperium could not contain. Human defenders and Na'vi inhabitants of Pandora were judged indirectly through reports and speculation. The Council agreed that their existence, culture, and integration with the jungle represented ideological contamination. Ecclesiarchy advisors warned that human settlers' symbiosis with the Na'vi was heretical, a deviation from the Imperium's doctrines that could not be tolerated. Children, in particular, were cited as dangerous anomalies, impressionable minds trained in cooperation with an alien intelligence, potentially spreading heretical influence across future generations. Their innocence had become, in the eyes of the Council, a source of strategic risk. The Council debated the implications of Iwa itself. Tech priests expressed fear that the planetary intelligence could be considered a machine in some sense, yet utterly alien in operation. Inquisitors argued over classifications, unable to fit Pandora into conventional categories of Xenos, machine, or anomaly. The very existence of Iwa challenged the rigid systems of the Imperium, a sentient planet capable of independent, coordinated defense, and one that integrated human and Na'vi activity into its own neural patterns. The reality was unprecedented, terrifying, and fascinating in equal measure. Discussions extended over hours, punctuated by briefings from orbital observation teams. Holomaps displayed energy fluctuations across the jungle, patterns of movement among human and Na'vi populations, and shifts in the biosphere that defied logical explanation. Every analyst emphasized the same point: Pandora was alive, aware, adaptive, and infinitely patient. Any decision made without full comprehension carried immense risk, yet indecision left the Imperium exposed to a world that had already demonstrated the ability to inflict costly defeats. The tension in the chamber reached its peak when a voice from the radical exploitation faction proposed direct engagement with Iwa, suggesting attempts to interface or control its neural network. The room fell silent. Even the most ambitious of inquisitors hesitated. The risk of failure, the potential for catastrophic feedback, and the unknown limits of planetary intelligence were undeniable. The proposal illuminated the fundamental dilemma facing the Imperium: the desire to dominate, the fear of annihilation, and the uncertainty of a world that could not be coerced. As the first part of the deliberations concluded, no decision had been finalized. The Council agreed to reconvene after additional observation and intelligence gathering, but the mood was somber. Every Inquisitor recognized that Pandora represented a unique challenge, one that could shape the future of the sector and the Imperium's understanding of sentient worlds. The debate over exterminatus, exploitation, or quarantine was only the beginning. Pandora, her human inhabitants, the Na'vi, and Iwa herself waited silently, patient and aware, as the galaxy's judgment loomed above, in the cold, unyielding void.
As the council reconvened after hours of deliberation, the gravity of Pandora's situation weighed heavily on every inquisitor present. Holo displays flickered with new data. Orbital scans revealed shifting patterns of life, energy pulses that defied any conventional measurement, and evidence that the defenders had integrated their movements seamlessly with the jungle's intelligence. Aiwa's influence was no longer theoretical. It was observable, undeniable, and profoundly unsettling. Every faction in the council understood that decisions would have far-reaching consequences. The Exterminatus faction renewed their argument with fervor. They displayed records of imperial losses, highlighting the futility of direct engagement. Armored vehicles immobilized by roots, infantry decimated by ambushes, and entire units rendered ineffective by unpredictable environmental adaptations served as evidence of the planet's danger. They warned that any delay in decisive action could allow Aiwa's influence to expand, strengthening the defenders and making future extermination efforts impossible. To them, destruction was the only method to secure imperial control and prevent ideological contamination. Radical exploitation advocates countered with meticulous plans for controlled engagement. They proposed using specialized units to interface with Pandora's biosphere, mapping the neural network and attempting limited influence over Aiwa's responses. Their arguments emphasized potential benefits, harnessing a sentient world as a strategic asset, acquiring resources beyond comprehension, and exploiting the human-Na'vi integration for imperial purposes. They acknowledged risk, but portrayed the opportunity as unparalleled, suggesting that with careful study, the planet could be brought under partial control without full-scale destruction. The Quarantine faction pressed for extreme caution. They argued that any attempt to exert dominance over Pandora was premature, dangerous, and potentially catastrophic. Their proposals focused on isolation, orbital observation, monitoring of human and Na'vi activity, and strict restriction of imperial intervention. They warned that Pandora's intelligence was not passive. It responded actively to threats, and any miscalculation could provoke widespread destruction. Containment, they insisted, was the only responsible option until more was understood. Tensions escalated as the factions debated. Tempers flared, voices raised, and accusations of incompetence and hubris were exchanged. The Exterminatus faction accused their rivals of naivety, arguing that Pandora had already demonstrated its lethal capabilities. Exploitation proponents dismissed caution as cowardice, claiming the galaxy's expansion demanded boldness and vision. Quarantine supporters insisted that both were blind to the consequences of underestimating a sentient ecosystem. The chamber became a battlefield of ideology, mirroring the conflict below on Pandora itself. Technical experts and tech priests presented data on Aiwa's neural network. Energy pulses synchronized with human and Na'vi activity suggested a level of planetary intelligence that was both adaptive and anticipatory. The council observed recordings of small skirmishes, noting how terrain, fauna, and defenders operated with seamless coordination. Algorithms designed to predict enemy movement failed repeatedly, confounded by patterns too complex and subtle to model. Aiwa's awareness was active, strategic, and fully integrated with its inhabitants, rendering conventional tactics largely ineffective. The Imperium's ideological lens colored much of the discussion. Ecclesiarchy advisors emphasized the heretical nature of the human settlers' cooperation with the Na'vi. Children, indoctrinated into symbiosis with an alien intelligence, were cited as potential vectors for corruption. Some inquisitors argued that failure to act decisively could allow these heretical practices to spread, influencing other human populations or even contaminating loyal imperial worlds. The debate became not only about strategy, but also about morality, obedience, and the perceived threat of ideological contamination.
Despite hours of debate, no consensus emerged. The Council recognized the unprecedented nature of the challenge: a sentient planet, an intelligent ecosystem, and a human population integrated with native aliens. Any action carried immense risk, and the Imperial's usual methods of dominance were insufficient. The factions continued to argue, each presenting detailed scenarios, each countering the other with logic, precedent, and data, but all shared a common understanding: Pandora could not be treated as a normal world. It required decisions that were careful, deliberate, and cognizant of consequences far beyond conventional warfare. As the debate continued, new intelligence arrived from orbital scouts. Reports indicated subtle changes in the jungle, pathways rearranged, energy pulses amplified, and signs that Iowa was responding to the Council's deliberations in ways previously unnoticed. The Inquisitors paused, realizing that Pandora's awareness extended beyond its surface, potentially observing and reacting to Imperial command decisions from orbit. The planet's consciousness was patient, calculating, and infinitely vigilant, reinforcing the need for caution and respect in all considerations. By the end of the session, the Council established preliminary orders. Immediate direct action was suspended. Further reconnaissance, monitoring, and analysis were mandated. The factions agreed to report new findings regularly, but each Inquisitor left with an uneasy understanding: Pandora could not be conquered through conventional force, exploited without risk, or ignored without consequence. The deliberations had only clarified one certainty: Iowa was awake, the human settlers were irreversibly integrated with the Na'vi, and the Imperium faced a challenge unlike any other in its long and bloody history. As the Council adjourned, silence fell over the orbital chamber. Inquisitors and advisors alike were left to contemplate the implications. Pandora waited below, vast, intelligent, and patient. Human settlers moved freely among the Na'vi, unaware of the deliberations above, while Iowa's awareness pulsed through every living and connected thing. The galaxy's judgment was suspended, but the quiet anticipation of Pandora's response served as a reminder that the planet itself was not passive. The Inquisitorial conclave had reached no final verdict, yet the forces at work were already shaping the future, and the cost of miscalculation would be immeasurable.
The final judgment upon Pandora was to be delivered in a chamber of unparalleled austerity, deep within the orbital command of the Ordo Xenos. Inquisitors, tech priests, and advisors assembled in tense anticipation. The weight of the decision was immense. A world that had resisted Imperial domination through intelligence, coordination, and sheer planetary will now awaited the verdict of the galaxy's most powerful human authority. Silence hung heavy over the chamber, broken only by the occasional mechanical hum of devices monitoring distant energy fluctuations from Pandora below. Reports from field agents, orbital reconnaissance, and intercepted communications were compiled meticulously. The Defenders' integration with the jungle, their tactical use of Awa's awareness, and their repeated humiliation of Imperial forces formed an unassailable record. Casualties, failed maneuvers, and lost equipment were noted with cold precision, yet the data carried a deeper implication. Pandora was alive, conscious, and entirely unconquerable through conventional means. Every Inquisitor recognized that the world's intelligence was not merely reactive, it was strategic, patient, and adaptive, capable of long-term planning and subtle influence on the battlefield. Debates were renewed, though they lacked the previous vehemence. Even the Exterminatus faction acknowledged that traditional destruction was no longer a viable solution. Orbital bombardment, virus deployment, or chemical weapons might inflict damage, but they would fail to eliminate Awa or prevent the planetary network from adapting and responding. Attempts to domination, they realized, would only provoke greater resistance and risk planetary retaliation that could extend far beyond the immediate sector. The Council began to understand that Pandora was not a target to be conquered, but a force to be respected, or at least contained. Radical exploitation advocates proposed a final audacious plan: attempt to interface with Awa using advanced neuromechanical constructs, manipulate the Defenders' neural links, and gradually integrate the planet into Imperial control. The plan, however, was met with skepticism and fear. Tech priests warned that the feedback could be catastrophic, potentially destroying orbital stations, damaging fleets, and even harming nearby systems. Any attempt to co-opt Awa's intelligence carried unknown, possibly galaxy-shaking consequences. The Council recognized that the risks outweighed the potential benefits, leaving exploitation largely theoretical and practically unfeasible. Quarantine supporters emphasized patience and containment. They recommended establishing orbital surveillance, limiting direct contact, and enforcing strict observation protocols. Human and Na'vi settlements would be monitored, but no immediate action would be taken against them. The plan relied on patience, recognizing that Pandora's intelligence was not hostile in a conventional sense. It acted in defense of its inhabitants and the balance of its ecosystem. Containment, they argued, was both the safest and most pragmatic course, allowing the Imperium to observe, learn, and avoid catastrophic confrontation. The defenders of Pandora, of course, remained unaware of the deliberations above. Human settlers and Na'vi moved through the jungles with quiet vigilance, tending to their wounded, reinforcing strategic positions, and maintaining constant coordination with Awa. Children, trained in the nuances of the jungle's rhythms and signals, continued their essential roles, relaying information, guiding allies, and observing Imperial activity from hidden vantage points. Every action, small or large, was integrated into the planetary network, ensuring that the intelligence of the defenders remained synchronized with the consciousness of the world itself. The Council considered the broader implications. Declaring Pandora a forbidden world would send a message across the Imperium. Some worlds, despite their resources or inhabitants, were beyond human comprehension and control. Such a declaration required careful wording, justification, and enforcement. It would not only protect the defenders, but establish Pandora as a case study in the limits of Imperial authority. Any lapse in classification could invite rogue fleets, unauthorized expeditions, or exploitation attempts, endangering the fragile balance that had been achieved through Awa's intervention and the defenders' careful coordination. Political considerations weighed heavily. Inquisitors debated the precedent such a decision would set. Would other sentient worlds, previously ignored or subdued, be declared untouchable? Would sectors of the Imperium question the authority of the Ordo Xenos to issue such a verdict? The arguments were complex, involving doctrine, theology, and strategic foresight. Every participant understood that Pandora was exceptional, but exceptional worlds posed both opportunity and danger in equal measure. The forbidden verdict would need to satisfy ideological, practical, and moral concerns simultaneously, leaving no room for error. Finally, after hours of deliberation, consensus emerged. Pandora was to be classified as a forbidden world. Exterminatus was deemed too dangerous and impractical, exploitation too risky and unreliable, leaving quarantine as the only feasible course of action. Orders were drafted to withdraw Imperial forces, seal off direct access, and maintain orbital observation. Human settlements would remain untouched, but their practices would be monitored as a potential ideological contamination. Na'vi activity would be observed without interference, recognizing their integral role in the planetary ecosystem and the coordination with Awa that had so thoroughly confounded Imperial efforts. The Council adjourned with a sense of gravity, unlike any other session in recent memory. Decisions were communicated to fleets, planetary authorities, and orbital installations. Pandora had been judged, and the verdict was a relief and a warning. The galaxy contained forces beyond control, beyond domination, and beyond conventional understanding. The forbidden verdict was a recognition that some worlds, their inhabitants, and their ecosystems existed in a delicate balance that human intervention could neither preserve nor command without catastrophic consequences. As Imperial forces received the orders, a sense of reluctant relief mixed with frustration spread among the ranks. Soldiers and officers alike understood the significance. Pandora would not be subdued, conquered, or exploited. Every engagement had demonstrated the futility of conventional tactics against a planet that was alive, aware, and fully integrated with its human and Na'vi inhabitants. Withdrawal was not a sign of weakness, but a necessary acknowledgement that the world's intelligence exceeded Imperial comprehension and demanded respect in its own terms. Human settlers and Na'vi continued their quiet vigilance, unaware of the Council's deliberations, yet feeling the subtle influence of Awa more acutely than ever. The jungle's neural network pulsed through every root, branch, and living creature, reinforcing coordination, signaling potential threats, and guiding the defenders in ways that transcended ordinary perception. Children relayed messages through instinctive understanding, human settlers moved with purpose, and Na'vi elders orchestrated defensive maneuvers that ensured no Imperial unit could regain foothold. Awa's awakening had altered the balance irreversibly, establishing a natural equilibrium the Imperium could neither challenge nor control. The withdrawal of Imperial forces was methodical but tense. Units retreated along cleared paths, careful to avoid ambushes and traps, while automated sensors monitored for unexpected resistance. Despite precautions, the jungle subtly influenced movement. Roots shifted, vines obscured paths, and fauna disrupted formations, ensuring that even retreat remained under the careful watch of Awa and the defenders. Casualties continued to mount as the jungle claimed those who attempted to overestimate its passivity or underestimate its intelligence. The forest was not forgiving, but it was fair. Every loss was a result of hubris, impatience, or miscalculation. Reports filtered back to the orbital command, detailing the difficulties faced during retreat. Commanders documented mechanical failures, miscommunication, and the uncanny efficiency of the defenders' coordination. Soldiers described encounters with phenomena that defied explanation, vines that moved to intercept attacks, creatures acting in precise formations, and the terrain itself seemingly reshaping to hinder movement. Every account reinforced a single truth: Pandora was alive, sentient, and impossible to dominate through conventional means. The forbidden verdict was not merely a bureaucratic decision, it was a recognition of an intelligence that the Imperium could not contain. Human settlements remained intact, their inhabitants continuing daily routines while remaining cautious. Children played in the forests, guided subtly by Awa's energy, while adults cultivated, hunted, and moved with purpose, fully aware that the Imperium watched from orbit, yet could no longer impose direct authority. Na'vi warriors patrolled, ensuring that human activity remained harmonious with the jungle, and that the planetary neural network was maintained. The integration of species and environment had become a living testament to survival, adaptation, and the subtle but absolute power of Awa's influence. From orbit, Imperial observation ships monitored the world with careful precision. Instruments detected energy fluctuations, population movements, and minor environmental shifts, all of which suggested ongoing vigilance by the planet itself. Analysts attempted to model these patterns, but the complexity was staggering. Awa's intelligence was adaptive, anticipatory, and deeply integrated with its inhabitants, rendering conventional predictive models ineffective.
The Imperium could observe, measure, and record, but it could not control or fully understand. Pandora remained a puzzle, a challenge, and a reminder of the limits of human dominance. Debriefings among Inquisitors emphasized caution, patience, and vigilance. Pandora's classification as a forbidden world required strict enforcement, no ground intervention, careful orbital observation, and constant monitoring of the human Na'vi settlements. Unauthorized expeditions, private prospecting, or opportunistic exploitation would be met with severe punishment. The forbidden verdict was not a guarantee of safety, but a framework for containment and respect, acknowledging that any misstep could provoke catastrophic consequences. Pandora had demonstrated that it could challenge even the most disciplined and powerful forces of the Imperium with subtlety, patience, and strategic foresight. As the final reports were filed, the Council reflected on the broader implications. Pandora's intelligence, the cooperation of humans and Na'vi, and the awakening of Awa represented a unique anomaly in the galaxy. It challenged long-held doctrines, exposed the limits of imperial strategy, and introduced a new variable in the complex calculus of conquest and control. The forbidden verdict was both a legal and philosophical statement. Some worlds, their ecosystems, and their inhabitants existed beyond domination. To interfere recklessly was to invite disaster, and to respect their autonomy was the only viable path to survival. Below, in the jungles, life continued seamlessly. Humans tended their crops, children navigated hidden paths, and Na'vi elders maintained the balance of the forests. Awa's presence pulsed through every action, guiding, protecting, and integrating all activity. The planetary intelligence was patient, aware, and unhurried, understanding that the Imperium's observation would last centuries, yet requiring no immediate reaction beyond the careful orchestration of its ecosystem. Pandora had won not through destruction, but through unity, coordination, and the quiet, relentless assertion of its own will. The forbidden verdict echoed through the Ordo Xenos command, a decision that would shape the Imperial strategy for decades. Imperial forces withdrew, orbital observation stations were established, and the world below was left intact, alive, and aware. Human settlers and Na'vi remained on their land, guardians of a delicate balance orchestrated by Awa herself. The galaxy had delivered its verdict, yet Pandora, in its patient intelligence, had already ensured the survival of life and the integrity of its consciousness. The story of conquest ended not with victory, but with the recognition that some worlds exist beyond any empire.
The jungle of Pandora stretched endlessly beneath the orbital observation platforms, vibrant and alive, pulsating with the quiet rhythm of Awa's consciousness. Bioluminescent flora glowed softly even as sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating the delicate balance that had been preserved. The human settlers moved through the undergrowth with a sense of security, fully integrated with the forest and aware of its intelligence. Children played among roots and streams, their laughter mingling with the subtle hum of the living jungle, each motion guided and harmonized by Awa's careful observation. It was a world alive in every sense, aware and patient, and for now, untouched by the destructive ambitions of the Imperium. Na'vi warriors continued to patrol the jungle, their movements fluid and precise, coordinating with human allies and reinforcing the bond that had protected the world. Every action was deliberate, every gesture measured, ensuring that the equilibrium remained intact. The forest itself seemed to breathe in unison with its inhabitants, roots and vines moving subtly as though acknowledging their presence. Predators prowled with a purposeful intelligence, guided by Awa, yet careful to maintain the natural balance.
Even the smallest creatures acted in concert with the planet's neural network, a testament to the intelligence that had confounded Imperial forces and guided the defenders to survival. From orbit, Imperial observation stations recorded every shift in the ecosystem, monitoring population movements, energy fluctuations, and the subtle interactions between humans and Na'vi. Analysts attempted to interpret the signals, but Awa's intelligence remained inscrutable. Every pattern was complex, adaptive, and beyond the predictive models of the Imperium. For all the technology and doctrine brought to bear against Pandora, the planet continued to operate with patience and precision, aware of every movement and decision made above its canopy. The forbidden verdict had ensured survival, but it had also established that Pandora's consciousness was not to be underestimated. The human settlers and Na'vi had built a fragile society of coexistence, integrating knowledge, culture, and survival strategies. Settlements were modest, in harmony with the environment, and carefully concealed to maintain the balance that Awa demanded. Children, educated in both human and Na'vi ways, moved as silent messengers, learning the subtle rhythms of the jungle and acting as extensions of the planet's intelligence. Adults coordinated hunting, cultivation, and defense with the same understanding, maintaining a society that respected Awa's consciousness and operated in concert with it. Every interaction reinforced the notion that life on Pandora was not separate from the planet itself, but an inseparable part of a living, aware system. Awa's presence was felt more acutely at the center of the largest groves, where energy pulses intertwined like neural threads, connecting fauna, flora, humans, and Na'vi in a vast, invisible web. The elders of the Na'vi taught the settlers to perceive these currents, to move in harmony with the world rather than against it. Even minor actions, from the harvesting of fruits to the guidance of children, were shaped by the intelligence of the planet. Every gesture, subtle or overt, reinforced the survival of the ecosystem and the unity of its inhabitants. Pandora was no longer merely a habitat, it was an active participant in life, a conscious guardian of its people and balance. In the skies above, Imperial ships maintained distant surveillance. They observed from orbit, constrained by the forbidden verdict, unable to intervene directly. Fleets moved cautiously, aware of the potential consequences of violating the planetary classification. Reports continued to flow to the Imperium, filled with technical data, environmental observations, and warnings of Pandora's unique intelligence. Yet despite all observation and analysis, nothing could replicate the lived experience of the jungle, the unity of defenders, and the patient adaptive consciousness of Awa. The planet remained inscrutable, untouchable, and alive in every conceivable way. Time passed slowly, the rhythm of the jungle unchanged by human observation. Settlers and Na'vi alike continued their lives, guided by subtle pulses, gestures, and the innate understanding imparted by Awa. The elders of the Na'vi taught patience, reverence, and awareness, ensuring that knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations. The jungle, alive with intelligence, continued to shape the inhabitants as much as they shaped it, forming a cycle of coexistence that no external force could disrupt. Somewhere in the void beyond Pandora, distant stars watched silently, and unseen forces took note of the living world. The jungle's awareness extended outward, subtle and patient, perhaps sensing currents far beyond the immediate system. For now, the Imperium had withdrawn, and the human and Na'vi communities thrived under Awa's vigilant guidance. But Pandora's intelligence was not idle. It waited, aware of the vast galaxy beyond, attuned to every potential threat, yet patient in its judgment. Life here had survived not through conquest or subjugation, but through unity, awareness, and the enduring presence of a consciousness far older and wiser than any human mind. In the stillness of night, the jungle glowed softly with bioluminescence. Creatures moved in synchronized patterns, and the energy of Awa pulsed through every branch, root, and living being. The settlers and Na'vi rested under this watchful guidance, secure in the knowledge that their home, alive and aware, would endure. The galaxy may have forgotten the world below, may have classified it as forbidden, but Pandora itself waited with patience, intelligence, and life that could not be ignored. The story ended not with victory, but with survival, a testament to harmony, resilience, and the quiet, enduring power of a world that waits.